First of all, I just wanted to introduce myself and say thank you to everyone for being here with us today. My name is Lisa Gonzalez, and I am the Director of Loss Control and Insurance Board. Here with us today is Patrick Shaw. He is the current Supervisory Protective Security Advisor for the Central Ohio District. We are very grateful of the partnership that we have with CISA and the Department of Homeland Security. And Mr. Shaw supports Homeland Security efforts, serving in an advisory and reach back capacity to the state Homeland Security advisors. He contributes to the development of the national risk picture by assisting with the identification, assessment, monitoring, and minimizing of risk to critical assets at the local level. So we're excited to have him here today to speak with us about active shooter awareness. So without further ado, I am going to turn this over to Pat's capable hands so that he can begin his presentation. I will say that if you have questions, there is a chat feature that is located, should be at the bottom of your screen where it says chat. Instead of unmuting your screen and asking questions, what I'm going to ask that you do is type in your question that you may have, and then we'll read them off to make sure everyone understands the question in case they didn't see it. And we will take it upon ourselves to interrupt Pat so we don't have a number of people interjecting all at the same time. Okay? All right. Thank you so much for being here again. And thank you so much, Pat. I'm going to turn this over to you.
Thank you, Lisa, and hello, everyone. I'm speaking to you today from Columbus, Ohio, where I am the District PSA for Central Ohio. My name is Patrick Shaw, and I'm a Protective Security Advisor with the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA. I would like to thank you all for joining us today for this webcast. Unfortunately, a very important topic, one that we don't want to scare anybody with, but we just want people to be prepared for the potential of something that may happen and be ready for it. And I'd also like to thank Lisa and the insurance board for making the webcast possible. And as Lisa said, I will entertain any questions that you may have. If the question is something we can answer short and it's for the benefit of the entire audience, we'll answer it during the course of the presentation. If it's something that we need to take offline and answer later, at the very end of this, my last slide will actually have my contact information, and it'll also have our website information, and it'll also have the ability for you to reach out to your protective security advisor wherever you may happen to be across the country. For those of you that are not familiar with CISA, we have been an agency under the Department of Homeland Security since November of 2018. Prior to that, we were part of the headquarters Department of Homeland Security. In addition to the headquarters in Washington, D.C., CISA is represented by 10 regions across the country. I am part of Region 5, which is the Great Lakes States, the 6 Great Lakes States, and I report to a regional director out of Chicago. For your benefit, CISA has regions that cover all 50 states, U.S. territories and possessions, with a cadre of about 140 protective security advisors. If you'd like to contact the protective security advisors, as I mentioned before, again, it's that final screen that comes up, and feel free to do a screen capture or take a photo of that slide. And if you only capture my email address, feel free to email me and I can get that information to you. Today, I'll be talking to you about preparing for an active intruder situations, also referred to as active shooter or active assailant situations. One of my priority responsibilities as a PSA is to work daily with risk managers, those that are associated with critical infrastructure facilities around the country, priority to those that we consider to be of national level significance. With those risk managers, I discuss current threats to the facility, how they're vulnerable to those threats, and any potential consequences that may come out of those particular threats that are out there. And we help them to develop adequate protective measures to make the risk acceptable to them. I don't stress risk avoidance to the folks that I deal with, but we do stress risk acceptance. Total risk avoidance is far too expensive and would likely be a major impediment to accomplishing goals of the facility. Risk acceptance, on the other hand, is managing the risk to an acceptable level that allows the organization to be successful and operate within its means. How many of you are risk managers? I contend that all of you are. Maybe you don't play that role in your house of worship, but you manage your own personal risk and likely that of your family members as well. How many of you drive, as an example? Even though you know there are a high number of distracted drivers on the highways these days, especially with the advent of the cell phone and texting, contributing to almost 50,000 deaths annually throughout the country, you accept the risk when you drive, but you're not accepting the risk blindly. You know that constantly improving security features on cars, enforcement of traffic laws by local law enforcement affords you protective measures to reduce the threat to an acceptable level. So that's just one example of what we mean by risk acceptance, knowing there's a risk out there, but being willing to accept a little bit of that risk. But the thing of it is getting it to that point where you feel most comfortable. Of course, in order to be able to do that, you got to stay with the threat. Threat is dynamic, it's changing constantly, and your protective measures are going to have to be able to respond to that as well. Today, we're going to discuss the threat posed by active assailants or active shooters. This is an awareness briefing to help you understand the threat and provide you with the options or ideas of how you might address the threat for houses of worship, yourself, family, friends, and members of your community. My office is all about prevention and preparedness. In other words, I am not a first responder. I would do you absolutely no good other than maybe being able to throw myself in front of an active shooter, but that's about it. We want to help you prevent an active intruder situation from happening whenever possible. We also want to be prepared in the event you have to respond to an active intruder situation and have the ability to recover from that situation or be able to come back to some new normalcy after that incident. Developing plans, training, and exercising plans are essential to your success. In dealing with an active intruder, although we will not spend a lot of time on planning today, since planning will be very involved and unique to your specific house of worship, we'll discuss the elements of planning essentially, and you'll know what elements that you might want to consider to include in your plans. So you see from what we're going to do today is going to talk primarily about preparedness, response, and recovery. And if all electronics work fine, we should be on slide number 2 right now. The agenda for today's meeting is going to be one, to kind of set the stage for you and let you know what the characteristics of an active shooter are, or as we see them, as we understand them currently. Then we're going to take a quick look at a short video, which will kind of walk through an active shooter type situation, just to stress some of the learning points of what we'll learn preceding that particular snippet. And from there, we'll actually go into from preparedness to response, and response basically being, what do I actually do if I find myself confronted with an active shooter? Next, we'll go into recovery, and that's the piece that a lot of people just don't even want to think about. It's a difficult piece to work with, and a lot of folks don't think about it. But recovery, thinking about recovery during the preparedness phase actually is extremely important, so that when you do get to a situation where you actually are in recovery, then you have the means available to you that you've thought out during much better times and have those available to help you get through the situation as it is. The very last part is going to be some materials and whatnot that are available through the CISA website. And again, the website will be posted on the very last page. But these are things that you please take and use. Just about everything that we're going to be talking about today, I think actually everything, is covered on our web pages, to include the videos. You can download those, you can use them with family, friends, and community, and we hope you do. So let's start with the characteristics. An active shooter is an individual actively engaged in killing or attempting to kill people in a confined and populated area. It's important that we stick by that definition because we use that when we're developing statistics. And I say we, I'm talking about the intelligence agencies, and I'm talking about the FBI, the Secret Service, everybody that's working on this situation, this problem that we have with these active shooters, trying to figure out what can we do to stop these things from happening. And so by gathering information and knowing as much as we can about them, hopefully, we can move forward. So our definition of an active shooter, we try to discriminate from, gang-related shootings or a targeted shooting. A targeted shooting might be something where I think we had a situation in Ohio a couple of years back where a brother-in-law came in and shot the minister while he was preaching. That was targeted because it was just that one individual. He was not trying to do anything with anybody else that happened to be in the church that day. So understanding our definitions hopefully puts that into a proper frame for you as we move forward. In most cases, there's no pattern or method to the selection of victims. And this is very important to understand because some people think that just because they're a child or there's elderly or whatnot, that they're not going to be caught up in an active shooter type situation. And that's just not true. Unfortunately, we've had a baby as young as 3 months old that was killed at a McDonald's one time as a result of an active shooter. Most active shooter situations are unpredictable and evolve very quickly. For those of you who don't know, the active part of an active shooter type situation where the individual is actually shooting usually only lasts between 3 and 5 minutes. Now, of course, we've had exceptions to that, but understanding that the thing's going to be lasting 3 to 5 minutes, that's not an awful lot of time for you to start figuring out what it is that you're going to do during that active shooter type situation. You have to know before it happens, and you're going to have to know exactly how you're going to respond. Preparedness and awareness are key to helping protect employees, customers, and ourselves. And that's probably the most important bullet on that screen. And that is to understand, that's what I'm all about, the preparedness and the awareness, what we can do now before something happens. And even though the risk may be low, the consequences of something like this happening are just horrendous. And therefore, you want to make sure that that's been taken care of now that you in your planning of what you've done. An active shooter attack can actually take place at workplace, schools, and hospitals, and unfortunately they have, and also houses of worship. And in a minute you'll see how things have progressed over the years, the number of places that these types of things have been happening. You'll see it varies sometimes from year to year. But again, by gathering this type of information, we can see that, where might something like this happen next? We're not there yet, but hopefully by continuing to gather information, we will someday be able to, again, stop these things from happening. Although many perpetrators have a history of negative, sometimes violent behavior, there is no one size fits all. So don't think that you know what a active shooter looks like just because you've seen an active shooter in the media or you've seen pictures or something like that. It can be anybody. And I probably shouldn't say anybody, but the range is just amazing. Yes, most active shooters are male, but we have had female active shooters as well. We've had in this country active shooters as young as 14 years old. Overseas, they've had them even younger. We've had active shooters as old as 82. And some of you may remember that 82-year-old was the individual that attacked the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. So there is a significant range there. And just by looking at somebody, you're not going to tell whether that person is an active shooter or not. There is no one profile of what an active shooter might look like. They come from all races, creeds, demographics. And so we cannot, again, assume based on any one particular element that somebody's going to be an active shooter. This next bullet, plan ahead. 77% take a week or longer to prepare for an attack. That is key, and we'll talk about that again in a little bit. But most people think that a lot of these folks basically snap, and a lot of these things happen almost spontaneously, and that's just not the case. The majority of them take some time, and time can be weeks, it can be months that they plan their activities of what they're going to do. An example would be the Virginia Tech shooting that took place, I think it's been about 7-8 years ago now. That individual actually went over, he had planned well in advance that he would go over, and he did. When he carried out his plan, he actually went over to the dormitory where students were going to be, and he chained shut the escape doors down at the bottom of the stairs. And he knew that when he went back that next day, that those people would not be able to get out of those stairwells. And he was just able to shoot that many more people that were trapped, not able to get out of the building. Another thing is that the tactics and techniques and procedures of active shooters have changed dramatically over the years. And whereas, one of the very first active shooter situations we had was an individual with a rifle that was shooting out of a tower. Some of you may recall that down in Texas. When the police actually went to respond to that particular event, they had nothing that they could go up against that individual with. All they had were sidearms. Back then, it was primarily six-shot revolvers. And it was only through the aid of a citizen that actually had a rifle in the back of his truck that he gave the police that they were actually able to neutralize that shooter. So people get concerned and upset when they see law enforcement responding in what looks like military equipment, which most of it is. But in all honesty, a lot of what they're carrying today and what they're doing is because they need that in order to be able to respond to some of the weapons that they're up against with some of the shooters that we have out there. Mental illness can only be verified in about 25% of those, and less than 3% are actually diagnosed with any type of psychotic disorder. This is surprising to a lot of folks. They figure that anybody that would do something like this must have some type of mental defect, and maybe they do. Maybe it hasn't been diagnosed yet. Maybe they're just somebody that was flying below the radar, if you will. But you also have to go back and look and see that, in this country, I think statistics show that over 50% of us have had some type of an issue, whether it be emotional, whatever it might be. So there have been a lot of mental illness in the country, but usually it's being treated. It's being treated very effectively. And but we don't want you to believe that an active shooter is always going to have some type of mental illness, because in many cases they don't. Stressors. So again, we're basing this on the FBI looking at the events that have happened in the past and the different various behaviors that they've picked up on, and you can see on the slide that they have an average there of 3.6 stressors, and if you look at those stressors, I look at it and I say to myself, well, during COVID, gosh, I probably had at least 3 or 4 of those. Does that mean that I'm going to be an active shooter? No. And so what's the difference? We're saying that these folks that are active shooters had 3.6. Once you go over 3.5, you're in trouble. Well, the big difference is that a lot of us have the means to be able to deal with the stresses. We have family, friends, we have support groups, we have programs through our work, we have counselors, and we have doctors. A lot of these folks don't have that, or they don't take advantage of those types of things, or they don't know where to get the help. And so, just because you may have a few of those stressors on there doesn't mean you're going to turn into an active shooter, but it does mean that we have people out there that do start to become pressure cookers and then really don't have a means to be able to reduce that stress. Concerning behaviors, on the other hand, 4 to 5 concerning behaviors over time, and over 50% of those that were out there. And you look at those concerning behaviors, again, mental health is listed there, but so is interpersonal interactions and quality of thinking and communication. And so there's something that maybe we can key in on when we see people that are having those types of difficulties. People that can't necessarily look you in the eye when they're talking to you, or they avoid, they become somewhat introverts and they don't want to socialize with people. Grievances, where grievances are identified, 49% related to adverse interpersonal or employment actions. And again, that's very important, and we'll see that come up again here very quickly. Knowing that a lot of people, something happens to them, and they, just like it happens to many of us, they feel offended. And for most of us, we figure out a way to deal with that. We get over it and we move on. These folks just don't get past it, and they start to fix on it. And we'll talk about that. So here again are some statistics, and this is 2000 to 2018. A lot of information on this page. I don't know if it surprises folks, the number of people that have been killed in these instances over the last 18 years. Some people will say, that's relatively speaking to traffic accidents or other things that have happened, even the pandemic, that number really isn't that high. Well, I think even a single one is too high. This is just something that should be preventable. It shouldn't happen in the first place. And, we have over 800 people being killed and another 1,600 that have been wounded, injured during that time period. And again, this is through 2018. If you look to the right there and you look at the top venue types, and so you see that, over the 18-year span, it was commercial places basically that had, and that includes your malls. But primarily we've seen an awful lot in the office environment, and that's why our clip that we're going to bring up is based on the office type environment, because they are somewhat a pressure cooker sometimes. But just to look at houses of worship on that particular over that 18-year period, and you see that about 4% of the active shooter, a total of 11, is what we had during that time period. Again, this is only up through 2018. You see also that the female shooter is, it was 3% up through 2016. And then you see that it's fallen to less than 1% in 2021. Now, let's talk a little bit about motivations, because we haven't touched on that. And that is also something that we're always constantly trying to find out why. Why did the person do what they did? So we know that there's going to be racism, there's going to be religious intolerance, there's going to be differences in ideologies and things like that are all going to factor into that. And it's always good when we can figure out what was the motivation behind why somebody did what they did. Whether it was bullying in a school, it's just good to know. Then we need to work on bullying, or something that we can address. But look, if you look at the slide, we have 37% of the people from the year 2000 to 2016 that committed suicide. And so less than half of the active shooter incidents that have happened over the course of the last 18 years, we don't even know what the motivation is, because they didn't leave a note behind. They didn't tell us why they did what they did. And the one that amazes me the most is probably the one out in Las Vegas. Here we have a multimillionaire, and this guy planned over the course of several months, had cases of ammunition, all kinds of weapons, and he goes up there and starts shooting out of that high rise into a crowd of people going to a concert. It would have been nice to know why he did what he did, but to this day, we don't. So keep in mind that there's a lot we don't know about these active shooters, and therefore we have to really stress and have to work on the things that we do know and things we can work with. Again, now we're looking at just 2021 statistics, and you can see that, in the houses of worship, we had 1. Again, commerce is still up there at 32. But this is a little bit misleading. This is just looking at one snapshot in time. And, we did have a lot of things that were going on in the last couple of years that have played into this and probably skewed our statistics somewhat. And so you can see, with about where the pandemic started, all of a sudden things start to rise, and they've been continuing to rise. Now, what would cause that? Is it the stresses that people have been under? So we talked about those stressors. How many were they under? Were they financial? Were they interpersonal relationships with people? It's really hard to know. But the other thing to consider is the fact that a lot of the places that people could have gone to get help during this time period were also limited because of the pandemic. And so folks couldn't maybe get some of the help that they needed. Hopefully we'll start to see these numbers start to come down as people again come out into the new normal of what we currently have. But right now they're on the rise, and it's bothersome that the fact that it would be on the rise. Active shooter statistics, these are locations. And again, this is just for 2021. If you lay the entire 18-year period over this, you'll see that you're not limited by any particular demographic as to where these things are happening. We've had urban areas, we've had suburban areas, we've had rural areas. Probably one of the most rural, most recently, was down in Uvalde, where I don't think you get too much more rural than that area. And so again, don't think that, or that you don't need to be concerned about something just simply because you're not going to be in an urban area. Active shooter locations with highest casualty counts. I personally have always been adverse to putting casualty counts out there, because it seems to me that some of our folks that actually become active shooters, they almost seem to want to one up the last person that did something. And so by giving them numbers and giving them statistics and things like that, they just have a target that they can work with. That's my own personal opinion on that. But we have gone so far as that we don't identify, at least we don't even speak about the folks that actually commit these crimes anymore, because we don't want to give them any type of media attention, because somebody sees that as a way to get attention. We don't want them to use that. If they're not going to be mentioned, then maybe they think twice about what they're going to do. But again, this particular slide is a little bit concerning to me, because if you look on here, you have that King Soopers grocery store in Colorado. You have the Kroger grocery store in Collier, Tennessee. You have, if you follow these types of things, or if you just recall, you'll know that we've had at least two Walmarts that we've had situations at. And one of the most recent ones was the Tops supermarket up in Buffalo, New York. Is this a new trend? Don't know. But again, these statistics, hopefully we can use, and we can use it to our advantage. But I like to tell people that's why I shop at 6 o'clock in the morning, but I know all of us can't do that. What I've tried to explain to you so far and point out to you is the fact that there's information we know about these active shooters type situations, active intruders, active assailants, whatever you want to call them. We kind of use the words interchangeably, and know that when we're talking about an active shooter, we're not just talking about somebody with a gun. It could be sharp edge devices, knives. But nowadays, we're also talking about improvised explosive devices. We're also talking about people using a vehicle to ram into crowds and things like this. So when you're looking at your facilities, you got to take all of that in consideration. You also need to take in consideration that it may not just be one of these, it may be multiple. So I use the San Bernardino, the first San Bernardino incident that we had, and I think it's been about 6-7 years ago now. Some of you may recall it was an individual that was going to an offsite that his company had planned. It was during the holiday season, but it wasn't necessarily a holiday party. It was a training event. He showed up a half an hour late, had a backpack when he came in, stayed about a half an hour, pulled out his weapon and started shooting people. He actually pulled out a long gun or a rifle, and he started shooting people at the facility. And then his wife came in, and one of our female active assailants, and she came in with a handgun, and she was basically finishing off all those people that were still alive after he had finished his shooting. Then they got in a car. It was a black SUV. And from the investigation, they could follow where the vehicle went when they left the facility, and it went up the street, and you could see local law enforcement was responding in the opposite lane, but they didn't realize at the time that that was the active shooter. They just knew that they had to get to the scene and neutralize the shooter as soon as possible. And as far as they knew, it was still ongoing. But after the two vehicles passed, the shooters actually turned around and they went back to the facility, or at least in the vicinity of the facility. And the reason they went back was because that backpack that individual had left behind actually had an improvised explosive device in it. And the active shooter had a remote control. And his intention was to kill the first responders in addition to the people that he had already killed at the facility. Fortunately for law enforcement, the device didn't work. And now law enforcement, even before that, they knew that they had to sweep the entire facilities, one, to make sure that there was no active shooter still present, but also to make sure that there wasn't anything like IEDs, improvised explosive devices, or anything like that that might have been left behind. In this particular case, the police had already swept the facility and missed the device and didn't pick it up until the second time they went through. But that's what our law enforcement is up against. But that's also what you're up against. When you're doing your planning, you just have to remember it may not just be an active shooter. And also remember that that active shooter might be trying to force you to move in an area or move in a direction that they want you to go, because maybe they want you to run outside because maybe there's another active shooter that's out in the parking lot, or maybe there's somebody out there with a vehicle that's going to try and strike you. So again, we're just trying to paint the picture of what the threat is and give you awareness on it. It's your detailed planning that has to take these things into consideration as to what you feel you might need to do about it. So we talked about a lot of the different things that we have seen in active shooters. And this is really the one place right now where we can make the difference. And that is when we start to recognize some of these potential indicators that we have on the screen here. And this is where we call upon you. This is where you're most likely going to be the people that are going to see changes in individuals that they just don't seem to be coping. They don't seem to be coping in a manner that you would consider to be associated with what you think would be improving health. And you got to decide, if you become aware of something like that, what are you going to do about it? And it comes back to that. Do you want to get yourself involved, recognizing, a lot of people are concerned that they may get the person in trouble. They may the person may lose their job because they're saying something. But on the other hand, you got to look and say, well, what if I knew this was going on and this person became an active shooter, and all of a sudden now we've got tens of 20s of people that have been killed because you didn't say something. So again, this is something we can do right now on the preventative and awareness side of the house. So if you become aware, and as part of your training, you let folks know if they become aware of thoughts, feelings, behaviors like we have listed on the screen here, then this is something that they should be bringing to somebody's attention. And make sure that you have the ability for people to be able to report that information, whether they would do it openly or whether or not they're going to do it anonymously, and then have the means to be able to follow up on something like this. So what we're getting to here is, again, on the preventative side of the house, that what we do see from all the information that's been collected is there seems to be this pathway to violence, that people will have something happen to them. There'll be some type of a grievance and they just won't be able to shake it. And so then it goes into a period of, how could I possibly get back for what happened? And then they go into figuring out what they would need in order to carry that out, till they all get all the way up to where they're doing their pre-attack surveillance of the facilities, picking their facilities where they're going to do, and then probing those types of facilities. So these are, I mentioned before, 77% of our active shooters go through a planning state. Some are weeks, some are months, but this is where we have our best opportunity to stop them. So again, if we have proper security procedures in place, we may see somebody that's exhibiting irrational thoughts or things that are contrary to what you think a normal person would be doing. But then if they're getting into the fact where they're looking to get information on a facility or a particular group, but then they start showing up on your businesses and they start or your houses of worship, and they're taking photos, or they're watching to see how you do security on a day-to-day type basis because they're looking for a chink in your armor. They're looking to see that there's a back door that's left open, every Sunday at 11 o'clock, because that's where the food service comes in. And so those are the things that you need to start evaluating and say, hey, I really don't want to become so predictable that somebody's going to be successful in being able to do pre-operational surveillance on me to figure out how they're going to attack my house of worship. And so again, just pointing out to you how you actually deal with something like that. The protective security advisors in your areas are available to work with you to give you options as to how to mitigate that type of thing. But be aware at least that this is what we see as the way that active shooters progress along this pathway of violence. So I'm going to show a short clip here right now, and hopefully everything will work appropriately.
She can't take half of my money. I'm the one who worked for it. You're a lawyer. Do something about it. She's getting the house too? What are you, blind? Hey, this is my parking space.
Come on, Mark. I got here before you did.
Mark, there are plenty of other parking spaces back there.
Mind your own business. This is between me and her.
Look, you saw me use a turn signal.
It's ridiculous to get upset over a parking space. Jeez. Are you okay?
Yeah.
Hey.
Hey.
Hey, Leah.
Good morning.
Good morning. Well, good luck at that presentation
Thanks.
today.
Have a good day.
So what is eating Mark? He used to be one of the nicer guys around here.
I know. He's been really difficult to work with lately. The other day in a meeting, I heard he left in a huff, and last week at lunch, okay, I saw it. He totally flipped out because the waitress got his order wrong.
Well, I heard he was going through a really messy divorce.
Oh, that's no reason to threaten your coworker, you know?
Mm-hmm.
We should go to HR.
I really don't want to do that. I don't want to spend my whole morning at HR. Hi.
Hello.
Hey.
I heard about what happened in the parking garage. Are you okay?
Yeah. Yeah, it's just not a great way to start your morning.
No kidding.
How did you hear?
Office gossip. But don't worry, I will take care of it. Okay?
Thank you.
No problem.
Gotcha.
All right. See ya.
See ya.
Bye.
Have a good day.
You too.
Thanks.
You wanted to see me?
Yeah, please have a seat.
I'll stand.
Would you mind closing the door, please? Mark, I heard about the incident today in the parking garage. I have to tell you, there have been some consistent complaints about your aggressive behavior, and that type of behavior is not acceptable here. Do you understand? I also need to speak with you about your performance lately. Your work quality's been very poor, and we've decided that we need to place you on a probationary period of 1 month. We'll be evaluating you weekly, and at the end of that period, if we don't see some significant improvement, then there will be some serious consequences. Mark, you could lose your job over this.
Fine.
Do you want to discuss this further? I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
No. Are we done here?
Yes, we're done.
This is it. I can't take this anymore.
So this is a scenario that we use in one of our active shooter workshop planning, and it's taken out of a larger block. But we use this basically to kind of bring home some of the things that we had just previously talked about. And so when you go into the garage area there, Mark is the person that's eventually becomes the active shooter. And is Mark actually upset his coworkers? No. But he's venting on them, and he's obviously people that were friends at one time. He obviously has developed some type of striking out at whoever seems to be an obstacle in his way. It's more likely he's upset with his divorce lawyer or his soon-to-be ex-wife or whatever the case may be. But you can see that he's got some stressors in his life, and you see that those stressors are going up and up and up. So now you see the two folks that were in the garage are now in the break area, and they're talking to each other, and they're talking about what they should do about what happened. And you can see that there were opportunities that they could have possibly told somebody prior to what happened today that Mark was changing. Something was definitely going on in his life. People were aware of the fact he was getting a divorce. And the gal refers to him as he used to be one of the nicest guys in the office, or nicer guys in the office. And now that's obviously not the case. And so these things are something that we can work with. We see this happening. It's just people are not willing to come forward and say something. And I think that when we see active shooter incidents that have happened around the country, and we see the local media go to interview their neighbors and friends and whatnot, we'll always hear that similar phrase. Well, he used to be the nicest guy in the neighborhood, but, or, he came over and asked my husband to go out, start shooting at the range with them. And heck, he never even owned a weapon before. Now he's got about 4 or 5 of them, and he's going out to the range 2 or 3 times a week. Those are all things that people could have um, reported, and possibly somebody could have gotten individuals help before something happened.
I just wanted to let you know, we did get a message in the chat that I wanted to read to you. I don't know if
Okay,
now's the right time or not.
sure.
Which is a great question. Mark had said, on the descriptions of what to look for, houses of worship usually welcome people with those issues and descriptions. So is there any advice on how to separate or deal with, or what kind of call to make with persons showing those descriptions?
Well, first off, I am well aware, and I've worked with a number of houses of worship that face that every day. And I thank you for the question, because it is an excellent question. And I can give some examples. I know that a lot of what churches have done in the past is they rely heavily on their greeters. And so they train up their greeters. They give them special training to help evaluate. They go through de-escalation so that when things seem to start getting out of hand, they know how to bring somebody back down and get them out of that agitated state. They also know that if they see something that looks out of the ordinary, to intervene as quickly as possible before that person gets to where they can be among a mass grouping of people. So you position your people strategically so that you look for them and you engage with them before they come into the facility. And then you have a predetermined method to be able to get them some type of a help. And if it's a situation where there's weapons that are already involved, things like that, you've got to get law enforcement involved and bring those folks in. But you have to have that relationship with law enforcement. So we very much stress that you have that relationship well in advance, that your local law enforcement is well aware of your plans, that you share those plans with folks, with your law enforcement. And so they know how you're going to act when you feel, trained people feel that their threat has been elevated by a particular individual that might be coming in. And then having a means to be able to take that person, get that person to somebody that can help them. But definitely not let them get to a scenario where they can be inside and they can have a weapon. Some of the things that I've seen is where people will come in with a backpack, and you basically have a policy or something like that, and you stress it with folks that the backpack or the bag isn't going to be above a certain size. Or if you're going to bring it in, you're going to take it to an area that's going to be like an ante room, or we used to call them a coat closet or something like that. And those things have to be left behind. They're not going to go into the main area where the preaching is going on, or where the congregation is seated, or whatever. So it's going to be layered security, moving up to where you're protecting what you consider to be the most critical asset, recognizing that in the outer rings of your security, people are going to be vulnerable until you can identify what that situation is. And you also have to be concerned about, okay, now you've prevented that person from going inside the church or the house of worship. Are they going to turn around and be that person that's sitting out in the parking lot now with a vehicle waiting for everybody to come out of church all at the same time and maybe try to mow people down? So you got to be vigilant before, during, and after, until that mass gathering, that target that person's trying to act upon, has been diminished. So hopefully I answered the question. Yes.
You did. Are you going to be reviewing any of CISA's resources for houses of worship, just mentioning them, or throughout your presentation?
I'm not going to mention them specifically, but I can do that right now if you'd like.
Well, I just wanted to let everyone know that Susan Schneider from the Department of Homeland Security, CISA at headquarters, wrote a wonderful piece on behalf of Insurance Board for beginning your security policy at houses of worship, that contain some very helpful links with all of those resources from CISA, such as when Pat was talking, it made me think of the Power of Hello piece. when he referred to greeters and the importance of just having people at the right spot and making sure that they're actually greeting people and being very observant about their surroundings and the people that are coming and going. So I will give you our email address, which is losscontrol@insuranceboard.org. If you are interested in us circling back with getting you the link for that, or I can actually go ahead and go online and pull the link out and put it in the chat for you. That way you will have it at your disposal. There's some people telling me they'd love to see the document. So I'm going to go ahead and put it in the chat, and then any follow-up emails to losscontrol@insuranceboard.org. I am happy to provide any of the resources that we have through CISA, or connect you with someone from CISA that would be able to assist you. So losscontrol@insuranceboard.org, that is correct. I will also put that in the chat as well. Sorry to interrupt. Thank you.
That's quite all right. Just so you know, folks, that there is a particular page out there that deals specifically with houses of worship. When you go onto our webpage, and just a really quick tutorial, we're at www.cisa.gov, and again, that will be on the last slide, that address. But once you go on there, across the top, you'll see cybersecurity, you'll see infrastructure security, and you'll see emergency communications. And you'll want to go into that infrastructure security because you are infrastructure. And then there's a little box there where you can type in what you're hoping to find. If you just type houses of worship in there, it'll take you to that page. And then you'll find a lot of the resources that Lisa was just talking about, to include a self-security assessment, if that's something that you want to do, where you can actually do the assessment and generate a report. And you can have your security teams or security committees work on the various options for consideration that we give, to see what might work for you and might not work for you.
It's an amazing resource.
So we are always working with, our other agencies, and as most of you probably are aware, the Secret Service is part of Department of Homeland Security, and they do, executive level type protection. So they're constantly being trained up on what to look for in the way of suspicious people or people acting out of place. And a lot of that information is being passed down in a lot of these papers and whatnot for you to take advantage. But it does require that those people have to be trained. You don't just want to put them out there and just say, hey, look for unusual behaviors, because they may see the unusual behaviors, but then they have to know how to deal with it.
We have another couple of questions. I don't know if this is a good time
Sure.
or not.
Sure.
One is, our church is in a very rural area, and the state police that cover our area are 25 minutes away. We have a daycare operating out of our attached Christian education building Monday through Friday. What are some good ideas to prevent entry into first floor windows, etc., since we do have security on the doors already in place?
Okay, and I'm gonna take this at a high level right now, because I don't want to, there's other people that may have timelines and whatnot. But I would suggest right now that you get your local protective security advisor to come out and meet with you and do a security assessment with you. But I can tell you, just from what you've told me, there are films and whatnot that can be put on daycare windows. We always say that you review your first floor windows in proximity to how close can a vehicle be parked, in case somebody's going to use a vehicle improvised explosive device, or again, an active shooter from outside. So things you can do is work with those windows. You get film on them. There's ballistics films that are out there. There's anti-fragmentation films that can be bought, and the prices on a lot of those are coming down. But you can also put up shades so that somebody cannot see in and see who's in those rooms. Maybe you want to disguise the fact that that's actually where the daycare is located for somebody that doesn't know the internal workings of the building. But again, I would strongly suggest that you actually have a protective security advisor come out there and take a look at your facility and give you those options.
And one more, which is general, which I assumed we would get this question. What is your stance on trained congregation members with permits to carry a firearm being in the sanctuary with a firearm on Sunday?
Okay, so I'll tell you straight up, we have no position on that, and we should not have a position on that, because we are not the risk managers for facilities, individual facilities. And that's why it's important that you have somebody that's been identified in that role. Whether it is the pastor, the minister, the rabbi, or that's been delegated to somebody else, that they get all of the information and they make the best choices for them. Yes, we do have houses of worship that do have folks that are armed, concealed carry, that are trained up, that are there, but they've made that decision that that's what they feel is necessary and they have to do. It's they have accepted that additional level of risk that goes along with having those folks in there that are armed. We can't do that for you, and we have no say. We should have no say in you making that decision. You need to take all the information, present it to that risk manager. Of course, Lisa obviously understands from her side of the house, there's going to be significant insurance issues when somebody makes those types of decisions because of the liability. How well was that person trained? How, when you stop and look at the number of police officers that have actually pulled their weapon in the line of duty over a course of a 20 or 30-year career, it is very low. Nobody knows how they're going to react when they're actually confronted by a weapon. It's very difficult to tell. We've had so many shootings and where, people just have not acted the way their training told them they should act, simply because it's the first time they came under that and they acted inappropriately. Other times we've had successes. We had the success, again, I think it was down in Texas, where the individual was able to stop the active shooter. And so, there's definitely pros and cons, but it's not for me to decide.
It's our position that it's not something that we advocate for a lot of the reasons that Pat had mentioned, but again, it's not for us to decide either. It's not something that we advocate for because, as Pat had mentioned, the incident in Texas, that was an individual that actually owned a shooting range and trained every single day. That may not necessarily be the case with individuals who are on a volunteer security force. And so, let's go ahead and move along.
So this is back in 2014, and it's a joint intelligence bulletin. That means it's put out by both Department of Homeland Security and the FBI. And this was just basic things that you can do in the way of protective measures that, regardless of whether it's an active shooter or whether you're just maintaining situational awareness around yourself, which is something you should always do. And these are things that you can do when you know that there is a potential threat out there or an elevated threat. And so, having plans is probably one of the most important things that you can do. And now, people say that, well, a plan, they don't work. Well, I think a football coach would tell you that you're right. They'll put together plans for the first football game of the year or something. They'll go out there and they'll get trounced, or they'll go out there and they'll have their plan and they'll throw the playbook out and they'll have to call all audibles. But the main thing is that by planning, you're identifying what resources you need. And if you haven't identified the resources, you're not going to have them when you need them, or you're not going to know where to get them when you need them. So planning can just be so beneficial as far as letting everybody know what you're trying to do, what their roles and responsibilities are, so that people are all acting in a common movement as opposed to chaos, because that's basically what you have. Without any planning whatsoever, you have chaos. So plans are very important, and I'm a very strong advocate of plans, training people on the plans and exercising the plans and then rewriting the plans, because every time you go through those plans, you're going to find something that you can improve upon. Establishing safe rooms, not everybody has the opportunity to do that. At least some of the safe rooms that are being built nowadays into homes and things like that, or into businesses, but at least identify places where people can go and lock a door from the inside so that they have some means of protection from an active shooter that might be going on. So whether it's, a cafeteria or whether it's a classroom or something like that, make sure you have those abilities where you can lock that room, you can block the windows, and keep an active shooter out. Communications, knowing what communications you have available to us. We have a lot of different means these days, everything from landline phones in rooms to cell phones. And know that during a emergency, the best way to communicate is through text. And the reason for that is because a lot of times your cell towers are going to be overcome. Your landlines even are going to be congested, especially in the area of where an active shooter is taking place. A text will ultimately go through. It may not go through instantaneously, but it's ultimately going to go through. So text between loved ones, leave the voice communications to the first responders and to the leadership that's trying to deal with the situation so that they can communicate with each other. I've already talked about exercises, and one thing that came out early on, like back in 2014, was the fact that some of the businesses we go into to talk to them about active shooter, they don't even like the word. They don't want us to bring it up. They don't want us to mention it. People have changed it over time. It's active assailant, or they just don't want to mention the word active shooter. So don't introduce active shooter right away. Say you're going to have an all hazards drill. A lot of things that you do for inclement weather, evacuations or sheltering in place and things like that, your communications are all going to be very similar across your emergency action plans. So introduce them incrementally, introduce them under different topics and headings, so at least people are familiar with how those things are going to happen. Then when they're ready, you can start talking specifically about an active shooter type situation. How can you assist your first responders? There's a lot of things you can do. Some of the main ones that we have on the screen here, if you have closed circuit television at your facilities and it happens to be newer and it happens to be web-based and you have an IP address, share that with your local law enforcement. Share it on a contingency basis that they're only going to pull it up when there's an incident that's going on at your facility. But if they can see from those cameras what's actually going on, those dispatchers can actually be relaying that information in real time to the officers that are responding. Plus, a lot of officers, their patrol cars have what we call multiple display terminals. They can sometimes even pull that information up on their cars or as they're responding to see what's going on. But again, these are things that you can't do during that 3 to 5 minutes. So it's got to be done, planned ahead of time in what you're doing. Maps to buildings, floor plans. It's amazing the amount of renovations that we do, and walls get moved and people never go back and update the floor plans. You got to remember that an active shooter going into a building, they may never have been in that building before, and they're not taking you with them. So they need to be able to navigate within that building with whatever you're going to be able to give them. So we've talked about go bags in the past. If that's a new term to a lot of folks, a go bag is something you can hand to that first responder that's going to have those floor maps. They're going to have fobs, keys, whatever they would need to be able to navigate through that building and be able to search every single room in your house of worship, because that's what they have to do in order to clear that building. And so these go bags are something that you can have available to hand to law enforcement, or you can give to the incident commanders that arrive on the scene and set up an incident command post. It doesn't hurt to have more than one. You can also have those floor plans already over at your law enforcement. You give them to them in soft copy. They can upload them on their systems. Give them to them in a book that they can flip through or have on their shelves and again work through. But make sure they're up to date and current for the folks to be able to use those. And if you do happen to have anything that's unique inside your buildings where the officers could be hurt as they're trying to navigate through there, that's something to also want to know. The best way for law enforcement to know the most about your building is to invite them in. Invite them in, let them do walkthroughs, let them use your facilities to train in. And they're going to have a very good understanding of that building. And they want to be able to do that. They want to have as many different types of scenarios as they can to practice on, and you can be part of that. You can also have a security officer or a law enforcement as a part of your security team. Maybe they can't be there for every single meeting, but you still, it's somebody that you've got liaison with, that you've networked in it with, that is going to have somewhat of an understanding of your facility. So now we're going to get into we've taken care of the preparedness and awareness, and we're actually going to get into response. And within Department of Homeland Security, we teach the run, hide, fight. Hopefully you've heard that before. We choose that simply because it's easy to remember. Most of us, like people like me, when I was younger, for a fire, we were taught stop, drop, and roll. We simply say run, hide, fight is something that's easy to remember. And if nothing else, it's something that if you know nothing more than just run, hide, fight, when you find yourself in an active shooter situation, if that comes to your mind, hopefully you're going to run. But We're going to go through this now just a little bit and talk about what we're talking about specifically for run, hide, and fight. And then we'll have a short video basically that'll will show response to an incident. So when we talk about run, if you're in a situation where you can get away, by all means, get out of the facility, take as many people as you can with you. If you think that somebody's not going to go with you and they're just slowing you down, unfortunately, leave them behind. Get out and warn other people not to go into the building, let people know what's happening. And when you get to a safe location, basically let folks know what's going on through 911. But do keep in mind that if you're running out of a building and somebody's already called in 911, law enforcement is responding. Again, they know nothing about that facility and they're coming into a very unknown situation to them, other than the fact that somebody's in there with possibly with a weapon and is killing people indiscriminately, as many as they can in as short a time period as they can. When you're running out of there, if you're screaming and yelling at them, they're going to be probably not the most polite people to you. So hands up in the air, nothing in your hands, because as far as the law enforcement is concerned, everybody that's coming out of that building is an active shooter until they determine otherwise. And, you know, the active shooter, the first responders on the scene, it may not be your local police. It may be a federal agent or something that happens to live in the area. It may be a postal inspector or something that's authorized to carry a weapon. When that information comes over the radio and word gets out, people come flying from everywhere. And so be prepared for the fact that they're going to have no knowledge whatsoever of your facility, and they're just trying to get in there to stop that shooter and stop him from killing people. Hide. If you can't get out, think about where you might hide. And now is the time to think about where it is that you might hide. Remember that concealment basically just hides you from the shooter. Cover basically provides you with a barrier. So pick and choose where it is that you're going to hide. Is there a masonry wall, but a brick wall or something between you and the shooter when you the place that you choose to hide? It's also important to remember here that you may not be fortunate enough to be in your building when something happens. You may be visiting somebody else. So whenever you walk into a facility, quickly glance around and say, hey, if there was an active shooter, how am I going to get out of this building? Make sure you know more than one entrance, one way in and out of the building, and also look around for rooms that you might have to flee to if something were to happen. But once you get into your safe hiding place, you blockade the door, turn off the lights, silence your phone, do all those things to make it appear as if there's nothing in that room and that the shooter's just going to bypass you. And then when you feel comfortable and you think you can call out to 911 and let them know what it is that you've seen and heard and what's going on at the facility. Fight. This is one a lot of people don't like. They don't like to even mention it. But the truth of the matter is, when it comes down to your life or theirs, you do whatever you need to do to preserve your life. I like to fall back to the situation down in Tallahassee, Florida at the Yoga Institute, I think, or the yoga location, I guess, or studio, I guess. There was an individual that had a very hard time with relationships with women, and he decided that he was going to, act out by going into a yoga studio, and he was going to kill the women that were in there. That's exactly what he did. There happened to be a couple of males in there that day. The guy initially shot and killed 2 women. I think there were 6 others that may have been injured. But at some point early on in the altercation, one of the male individuals in there picked up a vacuum cleaner and started hitting the active shooter with the vacuum cleaner. And then I think he moved to a broom and was hitting him with the broom. And if you recall the media coverage from that event, the women, a number of women were able to escape when he did that, and they saw him as a hero simply because he was able to divert the active shooter long enough to give them an opportunity to get out of there. So again, you individually have to decide whether you're that type of person that can stand up there and do something like that. But even with Gabriel Giffords out in Tucson, after that individual basically opened up, somebody went up there and actually put their hand right in the breech of the gun to stop that guy from being able to reload. And so actions fighting back can save lives. And if you're that type of person that's inclined to do that, know now whether what you might consider doing. Look around for, again, what you could use to help defend yourself in that type of situation.
Pat,
Yes.
we did get a question
Mhm.
Actually, we had two. One, they're more location specific, but it is relevant since there are a lot of older buildings, facilities and churches. Many of our buildings are older and not designed with safe rooms. Our front entrance is 10 feet from the sanctuary entrance. What do we do?
You know, you basically said, again, it's very difficult without actually seeing the facility, what's available to you, but you should never have just one means in and out of a facility. There should be multiple. And we've actually had some synagogues that have actually put in additional exits out of their synagogues simply because they were built with only one way in and one way out. So from what I'm hearing, hopefully there's other means. Hopefully, you know, you're going to have the means to be, if you know that that is a vulnerability to you, it's a high vulnerability, that you're going to be able to be watching to see before somebody gets up to where they actually are controlling that area where that's your main exit. So you intervene before they get to that point and try to stop them from getting there. As far as the safe rooms go, not everybody can have a safe room. It's just that simple. Some places they're just one big cavernous building, and there is no place to go. And so that's just not an option to you as far as what you have available to you as part of your protective measures. But if you are going to be doing renovations, just look at what rooms are available and how they might be reinforced. Whether or not you have you know, a lot of churches will have training rooms or children's teaching rooms that are associated with them, and you know, a lot of them have big glass windows in them and whatnot, and we understand why, because there's another problem leaving children alone with one individual, but have the means to be able to cover those windows up. So that somebody's not going to be able to see what's in there. Maybe have a window, but maybe have mesh behind that window. So somebody's not going to be able to kick that window out and be able to get in that room and be able to lock those doors from the inside. So those are all things that, again, it's facility specific, but again, having somebody come out and walk through with you, they probably be in a better position to give you, you know, specific options for consideration that you might want to think about.
The other thing I just wanted to mention, and I will also put in the chat, is that CISA and FEMA are conducting a couple very important webinars next week for houses of worship, specifically on security grants that are available to houses of worship to improve and shore up security in their facilities. I highly recommend anyone that might be interested in applying to sign up and attend their webinars next week. Also, one more question, Pat. Someone wanted to know if you have any recommendations about being in the natural open air, such as at a church camp.
First off, I just want to remind folks, we never give recommendations, because if we come in and give a recommendation and you decide you're not going to do it, media gets a hold of it because something happens and they say DHS was there or CISA was there and they told you to do this and you didn't do it. Just for that reason alone, because of the liability it imposes, we give you what we consider options for consideration. Again, it's up to that risk manager to decide whether or not they have the resources, you know, particularly budget, to be able to decide what it is that of those options that they can put into play. So now getting back to the question, you know, we've done security assessments on many of the camps and whatnot that are associated with churches. And again, you got to understand your threat. So, you know, one of the main things that a lot of times people will tell us, well, there really is no threat to the camps. And we'll say, well, if you're dealing with children, there's always the issues of domestic situations between husbands and wives and custody issues and things like that. And although it's not an active shooter type situation initially, it could easily escalate to something like that. So there are threats out there and people should understand there's threats, but it's the same thing. You need to go through and plan. What would you do? There are places sometimes, dining facilities or whatnot, that you might be able to get people into to secure. I've seen where restrooms have been used to turn into safe rooms. I've seen that camps have put in public address systems so that they can let everybody know when there's a situation that's developing and everybody can know in real time. So again, it's very much camp dependent, but I would again have somebody come out and do an assessment of that facility and take a look and see what you have available to you to work with. And, you know, one of the things that's really important there is understanding your threat and understanding when that threat might be elevated or it might become an imminent type situation. So, one of the things we haven't really touched upon is the fact that you can have security measures and you can have protective measures that you've thought about implementing, but maybe you're only going to implement them during certain times. Maybe you're only going to implement them when it's an activity type day where everybody's all going to be in one place at one time, like in the dining facility or something like that. And that's when you're going to put increased or enhanced protective measures in play for a short period of time. And the reason you're doing that is because it comes too expensive to try and have, let's say that one of your protective measures is to ask local law enforcement to come over as a special duty officer and be there because you're having a special event that day where you're having other people come on to the site, people that you may not know as well as some of the others that are there routinely. It's going to cost you money to have that special duty officer there, but they're only going to be there for a certain period of time. So you resource for those types of things. You identify those things in your emergency plans saying, listen, steady state, I'm going to do this. When I have an elevated threat, these are things that I can pick from that I can go to enhance my security. And if I have an imminent threat, these are additional things that I can do. Everything from closing the camp down and evacuating if I have to. But again, thinking all of these things through now and not finding yourself in a situation where it's happening and you have no plan at all. Okay, we're going to play the clip here now. It's about 3 minutes or so, and then we'll talk about it again afterwards.
It may feel like just another day at the office, but occasionally, life feels more like an action movie than reality. The authorities are working hard to protect you and to protect our public spaces. But sometimes bad people do bad things. Their motivations are different. The warning signs may vary, but the devastating effects are the same. And unfortunately, you need to be prepared for the worst. If you were ever to find yourself in the middle of an active shooter event, your survival may depend on whether or not you have a plan. The plan doesn't have to be complicated. There are 3 things you could do that make a difference. Run, hide, fight. First and foremost, if you can get out, do. Always try and escape or evacuate, even when others insist on staying. Encourage others to leave with you, but don't let them slow you down with indecision. Remember what's important, you, not your stuff. Leave your belongings behind and try to find a way to get out safely. Trying to get yourself out of harm's way needs to be your #1 priority. Once you are out of the line of fire, try to prevent others from walking into the danger zone and call 911. If you can't get out safely, you need to find a place to hide. Act quickly and quietly. Try to secure your hiding place the best you can. Turn out lights, and if possible, remember to lock doors. Silence your ringer and vibration mode on your cell phone. And if you can't find a safe room or closet, try to conceal yourself behind large objects that may protect you. Do your best to remain quiet and calm. As a last resort, if your life is at risk, whether you are alone or working together as a group, fight. Act with aggression. Improvise weapons. Disarm him. And commit to taking the shooter down, no matter what. Try to be aware of your environment. Always have an exit plan. Know that in an incident like this, victims are generally chosen randomly. The event is unpredictable and may evolve quickly. The first responders on the scene are not there to evacuate or tend to the injured. They are well trained and are there to stop the shooter. Your actions can make a difference for your safety and survival. Be aware and be prepared. And if you find yourself facing an active shooter, there are 3 key things you need to remember to survive. Run, hide, fight.
Okay, so a couple things that I'd like to just go over there, over with you as far as when you're in that response phase. And again, once you can get to safety and you know that you're okay, then we still want you to call 911, even though law enforcement is already responding to the scene, because you may have valuable information that nobody else is being able to provide. Also, keep in mind that if you were part of the incident, you happen to be at that area, you're a witness, and you're going to have to be, if the individual, the shooter, does manage to survive the action, there's going to be a prosecution. There's going to have to be an investigation to bring that person to justice, and your testimony could be very important. What you want to refrain from doing is being caught up in what we call groupthink, where several people get together and there's initial disagreement over what color shirt they were wearing or how many there were or what kind of weapons they had or something like that. You want to refrain from allowing that to happen, because what you remember is just as important what somebody else remembers, and let law enforcement work out actually what they have to deal with. But we don't want groupthink where somebody's prevailing attitude or whatever causes people to go with what they think that individual thinks he saw or she saw. The other thing is that, so knowing how many shooters, what kind of weapons, what they were wearing, where the injured were, how many were injured, those types of things are all very important to law enforcement. And when you get to that safe location, those officers are all wired up with communications, and your information can be relayed to them in real time as to what they're looking for. So it is very important that you do that. Law enforcement's primary goal, just to reiterate, is to neutralize the shooter. They're not there to help the injured. And unfortunately, when you're evacuating the building, if somebody has been injured, if they're not ambulatory, they can't walk, then you probably need to leave them behind, because otherwise you're just going to become another casualty right there along with them. And that's a hard thing for people to understand, but first aid will be coming as soon as those law enforcement can neutralize those shooters. And know that there is continuing thinking along those lines about how quickly they can get paramedics in there. The initial paramedics are going to be there for the law enforcement officers in case they get shot during the course of the engagement, but there will be others that are going in, and they're working on developing secure areas where they can incrementally get people in there, medical assistance in there as soon as possible to take care of those folks.
Pat,
Yes.
we had a question. Do all 911 systems have silent text options?
Not yet. That's something that's being worked throughout the country. We have it in some areas, and I can't tell you specifically which ones, but it is something that eventually, probably within the next year or two, we'll probably have it throughout the country. Reactions of managers, again, people typically look up to those folks that supervise them, that they see as leadership type positions. But I'll tell you that so they can also freeze up just like anybody else. You saw the one gal in the video clip there that just she couldn't do anything. She was a mess. Same thing can happen to a manager. So if you've got a plan and you've been through training and you think you know what the answer is, you are always empowered to do whatever you think is necessary to save your life and that of others. And so that is probably one of the key takeaways from the discussion today, is that if you find yourself in that type of position, know that you can do what you feel is the best course of action for yourself and others that are around you. But if you are a manager and you can function, then remember to have that professional appearance about you, that you know what you're doing, you have the information, and you're going to be able to get people, you're going to do your best to get people out there in a safe and efficient manner. The last area we're going to talk about is recovery. And again, this is one that people don't even want to think about. And a lot of times they don't. But you've just had an active shooter type situation at your church, your house of worship. It is now a crime scene. You may not be able to even get back in there for a couple of days until the entire investigation is completed. When we talk with businesses, and I don't necessarily refer to churches as a business, but they do have a financial aspect about them. There are people that are employed, and you can make a bad situation even worse because you don't have the means to be able to reconstitute and come back after something like this has happened. So think about alternate locations where you might be able to go. We've had churches that have basically have agreements with other churches that they can't get back into their facility. They're going to use somebody else's. These are things, again, you want to identify up front. But look at the consequences of what you've been up against. An after action report is you may think that that's the last thing you're going to be thinking about at that moment, but that's actually the best time to capture what went right, what went wrong. And even though the chances of another active shooter ever taking place at your location again are even smaller, other folks out there can benefit from what you learned, and being able to pass that information on to others is going to be very beneficial. But you also have to have a means now. You've lost people. You got to have a means to be able to account for missing people. You got to be able to figure out who's going to do notification and next of kin, and it's an extremely difficult environment these days with instantaneous texting and things like that through the media. And so you want trained people that are willing to go do something like that, rather than just trying to appoint people after it's happened and say, hey, can you go over and do notifications. You want to know where counselors are coming from. You want to know if you either have them on retainer and have the resources available to pay for those. And these are things, again, in much calmer times that you can think through and you can discuss and you can figure out how you're going to do it. Addressing families and victims, have a means in place ahead of time as to how that's all going to happen. An incident takes place at a house of worship. The last thing that you want is for people to be loved ones coming to the church trying to figure out what happened to their family members. You want them to know that the best information they're going to get is going to be either through a website or going to a different location that's been pre-identified, where they're going to get information directly from those people and they have that information. Going to the actual scene is just going to complicate matters, and you're actually going to be making it much more difficult for law enforcement to resolve the situation. And you're also probably going to run into multiple members of the media. So have those things in place, the way you're going to communicate with people. We have a lot of means available to us today, whether it's going to be a secure website on a VPN, or whether it's going to be a place that people are going to go to. But now's the time to be thinking about how you're going to communicate with members of your congregations. External communications, this is always very important, and you probably want to think about pre-scripted messages that you would want to have available and have somebody designated as a spokesman, because you don't want bad information being put out. You want the best information being put out. And if you're not ready to release a statement, then those people know that, no comment is okay until you have better information available. A lot of people just want to talk about everything that they know at that particular time. But unfortunately, what they saw may have only been a piece of the picture, and it may not be the most accurate information. So you got to wait till you have a good accounting and have the right people that are out there talking to the media for you. And then the last thing is the continuity of operations, knowing exactly how you're going to come back from what's just occurred. And I throw this out there just to let folks know that we've had a lot of facilities that never do come back, simply because people don't want to be there anymore. And so, they've already said that Uvalde will not be a school anymore. It'll become something else. We've had other places where we had an entire shopping mall at one time that was taken down because nobody would shop there anymore because of an active shooter type situation that happened there. And, that's just something that you need to be aware of. And as part of your recovery plans, try and figure out what you can do to be able to manage something like that. So now I'm just the very last thing here is just going to be some of those materials that I talked to that are available out there. And again, this is a snapshot of our webpage. And you can see from these little symbols that are down there that, we're trying to specifically direct you so you're not lost on our webpage. So you can either go in as a private citizen, or you can just go into products and resources and you can look for the types. It doesn't cost you anything to go through here and look. And if you find anything that's available to you, by all means, download it and use it. This is very important because, we've been talking today primarily about houses of worship, but we also mentioned the fact that active shooter type situation, active assailants can happen just about anywhere where we have what we call soft targets. And that is a large gathering of people that are relatively unprotected. And so share this information with family members, with friends, share it in your communities, let them know that this information's out there, because it may not be your house of worship on Sunday or Saturday that you're going to that actually has the issue. It may be the place that you go to brunch afterwards at the shopping mall or something like that. And you still want to be prepared. You still want to have situational awareness as to what's going on. So you want to be thinking about these things. And so use the information we have available to you out there. We have guides on how to actually start building emergency action plans. Protective security advisors like myself, we will not write these plans for you because that takes away from your understanding of your facility. You need to sit down and start writing it. I know I had an English teacher one time. They told me I had to write 1,000-word paper, and I just froze. And I said, I can't write 1,000 words. And they said, just start writing and it'll come to you. Same thing with your emergency action plans. Just start writing. It'll come to you. So we have guides, videos, and templates. We have cards you can stick in your purse, in your wallet, or put in break rooms or cafeterias, to remind you of what you need to do for an active shooter type situation. We've got videos out there. And again, everything that we've talked about today, you'll be able to find on our webpage. And we also have training. So folks that couldn't make today, if they want a certificate, they can go out and take a 45-minute training on our webpage, and they'll take a test at the end and they can get a certificate based on what they learned. And these two guides here basically go along hand in hand with what we've been talking about: preparedness, prevention, and recovery. And you definitely want to take into account all three. We also have some webinars that go on every week as far as active shooter planning. And we used to have an 8-hour class. We'll probably be going back to that again. That can come to you if you want to host it. We'll bring it into your neighborhood, and we'll have you can bring together your community and work on active shooter plans. Here's the one that we mentioned earlier about employee vigilance and de-escalation. The power of hello is also on this particular page. Again, it's all on our webpage. always keep in mind the fact that people say to me, well, if it's an insider that's doing this, they're going to know all of our plans. Well, again, you got to be ready for something like that, because in a lot of cases, especially at businesses, it is an insider that's involved in these types of things. And you just have to be ready to address that. Know that they may know what your evacuation procedures are. So if you're going to a particular area where everybody evacuates to, maybe have 2 or 3 different areas, and then you just randomly pick one so that nobody knows exactly which one you go to each and every time. Just don't become predictable in what you're doing. And that concludes what I have for you today. I see I've gone 3 minutes over, but this is the most probably one important slides in the deck. It's got the contact information, it's got the website, and at the very bottom down there, that's central@cisa.gov. You can send an email to that address. If you're looking for your protective security advisor in your region, just let them know who you are, what you're looking for, where you're located, and they will send it. Central will send that information out to the appropriate region, and it will get down to the PSA in that area, and they will reach out to you.
Pat, we have another couple of questions. I don't want to speak out of turn, but someone asked whether or not there is a cost to have a PSA come out to their church. I believe I know the answer to that, but wanted you to.
You've already paid for it. It's all been paid for in your federal dollars. And,
Yes.
We understand, especially with houses of worship, that a lot of people are doing what they do, especially on security teams and whatnot. You're not available Monday through Friday because you have other employment that you need to do. So we'll work with you. If we can help you out on evenings and weekends, we've done that many, many times. And it is completely free.
I would also reiterate, I put our address in our thank you, everyone. And I would also mention that this is being taped, and we're going to put it together afterwards, and then we will have it available on our online learning page. I believe that I did already put in the chat the information on emergency planning. So if you scroll up in your chat feature, I believe I did list all of that information and all of those links. I encourage you to also check out the link, which Elizabeth, if you're still on, could you put that back? Oh, here it is. I will go ahead and put that in the bottom again. This link that was written by Susan Schneider, who is the chief at the Active Assailant Division at HQ for CISA in Washington. And it has all of these important links that I have already provided, and as well as the ones that Pat had mentioned. So Pat, honestly, thank you so much from the bottom of our hearts. We really appreciate this. Is wonderful information. I can't tell you enough how much, how grateful we are to have you with us. And thanks again to everyone for being here. And again, if anyone else needs to reach out to us, our address is losscontrol@insuranceboard.org. I would encourage you to reach out to Pat, or I have also used the central email at cisa.gov. That's where you can reach out to find out who your local PSA is, to connect with them. It's always a good idea to know who that is. And we look forward to connecting with you again in the future. Thanks so much for being here, everyone. Have a great day.